Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Thomas. I'm Director of the Endangered Landscapes Programme, and thank you for giving me and my colleague, Dr. Nancy Ockenden, the opportunity to talk to you about the programme. To begin with, just a few stark reminders, as if you need any, of the context for ecosystem restoration. And ecosystem restoration is really what the Endangered Landscapes Programme is all about. So, of course, we're all absolutely dependent on healthy ecosystems on a healthy planet. Forests provide drinking water to 1/3 of the world's largest cities. Half of the world's gross domestic product is dependent on nature, and peatlands store nearly 30% of global soil carbon and so help regulate climate. Yet we've been careless about the way we treat these vital assets, with dire consequences for our economy and for society. Land degradation has reduced the productivity of 23% of the global land surface, and nearly $600 billion in annual global crops are at risk from pollinator loss. Up to 700 million people are predicted to migrate because of land degradation and climate change by 2050. So the loss and degradation of ecosystems is now so bad that conservation, protecting what we have left, is no longer enough. It's now widely accepted that restoring ecosystems is essential to humanity's survival. And in recognition of this, all the major environmental conventions, some of them pictured here, on biodiversity and climate change, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, have specific targets to restore Earth's degraded ecosystems for nature, for climate, and for people. And also in response, the United Nations has designated the 10 years from 2021 to 2030 as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration to help focus and coordinate efforts, attention, and resources on this critical issue. So it's in this context of a growing global awareness of the need for ecosystem restoration that the Endangered Landscape Programme works. So before I go on to talk about the programme itself, a few words about the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, CCI, which manages the programme. So I don't know how many of you are aware, but Cambridge is the hub of the largest cluster of conservation organisations in the world. And the Cambridge Conservation Initiative is a unique collaboration between the University of Cambridge and 9 leading internationally focused biodiversity conservation organisations that are based in and around Cambridge. You can see their logos on this slide. And so those partners, they together combine and integrate research, education, policy and practice to address issues of conservation that we all face. So now on to the Endangered Landscapes Programme, and first an important acknowledgement to the programme's funder, Arcadia, which is a charitable fund of Elizabeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin. So it really has been their vision for the programme, their insights, their support, and of course their funding of over $60 million to the university that's making all that you'll now hear about possible. So quite simply, the programme is a response to the problems that I've described and the need to restore ecosystems at large landscape scale. So its goal is effectively summed up in its strapline, restoring landscapes for life. So what does this mean? Well, in many landscapes, species have become locally extinct or populations are dangerously small. So it's about bringing back biodiversity. And across much of Europe, key species that create the dynamics and the disturbance that's essential for maintaining species richness, species like large herbivores, have been lost. So it's also about restoring ecological processes and ecological functionality. It means reconnecting fragmented habitats so that species can move in response to climate change. And it means restoring ecosystem services, the services on which we all depend, like carbon storage and water regulation. And in many parts of Europe, economies are in decline, and restoring the countryside also needs to be about restoring the local economy. So the programme has a number of different activities, and principal among these is the provision of grants for restoring landscapes at scale. So about 95% of the programme's funding is really focused on delivering restoration through those grants. But then the programme works through and with the showcase projects that it funds to deliver other outcomes to support restoration and help to scale up impact. So they include activities on science and knowledge generation, on networking and capacity development, on communications and engagement, and on influence. Focus on the programme's grant making, and specifically on projects that are funded through the large landscape restoration grants. And I'll talk a little bit about the kinds of interventions that landscape restoration in these situations involves with reference to some of the projects, just to give you a flavour of the kind of initiatives that we're involved with. So this slide, it shows the programme's current portfolio of landscape restoration projects, 8 of them so far. And by the middle of next year, we expect to have expanded this to include another 7 or 8 landscapes around Europe. So they cover a range of European geographies, from east to west, north to south, montane to marine. So it's really quite a diverse portfolio addressing restoration in a whole range of different contexts. So, needless to say, landscape restoration isn't straightforward. So again, before I talk about some of the projects specifically, and to establish some further context for the work, I'm just going to mention some of the key issues that nearly all landscape scale restoration projects face. So firstly, restoration takes time. Wetlands might recover very quickly, but forests take much longer, especially in northern latitudes and at higher altitudes. Some of our projects have a 200-year plan for ecosystem recovery, and they need a level of commitment from the organisations and from the communities involved really to match this. Second, landscapes have often been shaped by traditional forms of land use. Local culture, language, they're often closely connected with the landscape. And changes brought about through ecological restoration might seem positive to those from outside the area, but for local people, they might appear threatening and present a challenge to their culture, traditions, values, and identity. So projects really need to recognise this and work with local people to deliver the changes that they want and that they aspire to. In some places, ecosystem restoration can mean the return of species that are in conflict with local land use, and which generations of land users have spent their life trying to remove, like wolves and lynx and bear. And again, if restoration of such species to a landscape is part of the vision, then projects need to do this with local people and must really find ways that allow coexistence between people and those kind of species. And then many of the places where environmentalists see opportunities for restoring ecosystems are areas that are in economic decline, remote places where services are poor, agricultural productivity is low, and young people have migrated to cities in search for work. Restoration can provide economic opportunities in those areas, linked, for example, to payment for ecosystem services or ecotourism, but there's still a need to recognise the economic and social challenges that local people face. And there are distribution issues when it comes to the benefits from restoration. So when a piece of land is restored, the people who benefit might be those in the villages downstream who are at lower risk of flooding, let's say. So mechanisms need to be in place to ensure that landowners are compensated for the personal costs of restoration that they might face. And lastly, landscape scale projects are complex. They inevitably involve multiple landowners with agencies, government agencies often responsible for water, for transport, for food production. So resolving complex and sometimes conflicting agendas is never straightforward. So on to some examples. And the first landscape I'm going to talk about is the Danube Delta, where work is taking place at core restoration sites in Ukraine, Romania, and Moldova. So the Danube Delta is one of the largest delta systems in Europe. Its waters harbour over 60 species of fish, including 4 species of sturgeon. Most of them are threatened. Breeding bird colonies, notably terns and herons, total tens of thousands of individuals. And there are globally important populations of threatened bird species, such as pygmy cormorant and white and Dalmatian pelicans. One of the main problems in the delta is caused by the artificial communist era polders. Salinization has made many of them useless from an agricultural point of view and has also affected their value for fisheries. As a result, there's growing support among local communities and authorities to reopen them for flooding. Reconnecting these lakes to the Danube Delta to re-establish natural seasonal fluctuations in water levels and allow the free passage of fish is one of the principal activities of this project. Another environmental problem in the Delta is the loss over hundreds of years of keystone species that would have driven ecosystem processes and ecological succession. And in the absence of large herbivores, the Delta's wetlands have become uniform, unbroken, impenetrable reed beds, low in biodiversity, like those pictured here. So as part of its restoration activities, our grantee, Rewilding Europe, is reintroducing large herbivores, including the conic horses pictured here, water buffalo, fallow deer, red deer. And it's restoring missing large herbivores like these, drivers of ecological change that's creating heterogeneity in the habitats. It's opening up these dense reed beds and helping to create spawning areas for fish and nesting areas for birds, and therefore improving this landscape's value for biodiversity. And it's such reintroduction of populations of keystone species, it's a really quite common intervention for restoration projects. So the second landscape I want to mention are the favour mountains, which are part of the Carpathian Mountains in Romania. So this area, it contains the largest area of continuous alpine zone habitat in Romania. And about 75% of the mountains are covered by forests, spruce forests at higher altitudes, and then mixed deciduous forests at lower altitudes. A significant percentage is still old growth forest has been untouched by logging, with really good populations of bear, wolf, and lynx. But again, in the post-Soviet era, many landowners sold off their forests to commercial timber companies, and without regulation or effective enforcement, really quite large areas quickly succumbed to unregulated clear fell logging. And the project, amongst a whole range of activities, is restoring areas where the forests were felled and is working to establish a national park over the whole area in order to ensure its protection in the long term. To achieve its goal, local support and pride in the landscape and recognition of the opportunities that conservation, restoration, and designation as a national park can provide is key. So the project has a major outreach programme, which includes a popular annual festival to celebrate the area's environment, food, and culture. And it's not just about local people and local support. So through its communications campaign, the project has reached, in connection to the last festival, a total of audience of around 3 million people nationally. So local people's involvement and support is really key to the success of landscape restoration everywhere. And all of the projects that the programme is supporting include activities which engage communities and really celebrate the landscape and their past, present, and future connections with it. So my final example is this transboundary landscape in Ukraine and Belarus, Polessy. So Polessy is an area of free-flowing rivers, vast floodplains and wetlands, an abundance of wildlife that extends over an incredible 18 million hectares. Much of it is included within protected areas, but there are problems. And one of these major ones is that the protected areas are disconnected. It limits their potential for wide-ranging species like lynx and wolf. Areas of wetland have been drained in an attempt to convert the land for agricultural use. Illegal harvesting of berries causes disturbance to nesting birds, and there's destructive mining of amber. But drained wetlands often have amazing powers of recovery once natural flows of water are restored. Aquatic insects and their eggs or larvae are carried in the inflowing water. Seeds too can be waterborne or may have survived in the soil or be reintroduced by visiting birds, helping to quickly re-establish a functioning wetland. So restoring natural water flows, again, it's a common approach in landscape restoration. And one of the interventions taking place in Palessi is to restore a large area of wetland where drainage for agriculture was attempted. And in the video you can see now, I'm going to hand over to Viktor Shvenchuk, the project's manager in Belarus, to explain more.
Mires are among the most unique ecosystems on the planet. They store huge amounts of carbon and water and play a major role in conservation of biological diversity. Well-being of humans depend on it much more than we can appreciate. In the framework of the project Policy Wilderness Without Borders, which is funded by Endangered Landscape Programme, we aim to restore over 6,000 hectares of mires in the cross-border region of Polisia in Ukraine and Belarus. We are now at our first restoration site, which is called Neresnya. From the air, this site looks very nice and green, but on the ground, the problems become apparent. In particular, if we look at the peat layer, which is absolutely dry and basically looks like gunpowder. Neresnya is a site which covers an area over 2,000 hectares and is a combination of heavily drained transitional mire, which was used in agriculture and then abandoned, and moderately drained natural bog. In our project before restoration, we set up a monitoring system to fix the baseline parameters and assess how restoration is taking place. We are looking at how much water is discharged through the drainage channels, how groundwater level fluctuates at different parts of the restoration site. We have made a very detailed vegetation map to see how vegetation reacts to restoration, and we are looking at invertebrates, which we believe will be the fastest reacting group of animals. Our baseline data shows that every year over 10 million cubic meters of water is discharged from the site through the drainage channels. And the restoration strategy will be straightforward and will involve blocking these drainage channels with simple soil dams, which we know are very effective and easy to maintain. These restoration activities will start already next year. Look forward to seeing you all here, guys, next year.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to David for that great introduction to the Endangered Landscapes Programme. So my name is Nancy Ockenden, and my role on the programme is the Science Manager. I hope you also enjoyed that video from the ELP-funded project in Polisia. I think this gave a really good introduction to the work they're doing to restore and protect a really enormous wetland ecosystem lying across the border of Belarus and Ukraine. Victor also talked a bit about the importance of monitoring in restoration projects. And that leads really nicely onto what I'm going to talk about today, about some of the science work taking place across the programme and how we try to support the projects we fund to collect data, to understand and demonstrate the benefits that ecological restoration is bringing to these landscapes. So although the primary role of the ELP is to manage the funding of projects, we also want to ensure these projects are carrying out science-based restoration. Our base in CCI allows us to build links between the projects that we fund and the skills, expertise, and data that are present in the partner organisations, and that includes the University of Cambridge. So, for example, by facilitating collaborative research projects and knowledge exchange and providing training. So there are four main strands to the science work in the ELP. Firstly, we ask all the projects that we fund to think about the evidence on which their plans and decision-making are based. This is to ensure they're building on current knowledge, not repeating mistakes, and to carrying out the actions that are most likely to be effective in achieving the aims they want to get to. Secondly, all our projects need to carry out an experiment as part of their restoration work to generate new understanding about what happens when a certain action is implemented. This aims to advance our knowledge of what does and doesn't work in restoration. Thirdly, we provide small grants for projects that advance our knowledge of how best to carry out ecological restoration. So examples of projects we've recently funded include the use of satellite data to monitor change at landscape scale. And we've also got a project calculating the climate benefits of restoration by assessing the amount of carbon stored in natural restored habitats, such as forests, grasslands, and marine ecosystems. Finally, and a really important priority for us, is that all our projects carry out effective and appropriate monitoring to demonstrate the progress they're making towards their outcomes. And this will be the main focus of my talk today. But I'd be more than happy to discuss the other parts of our science work during the Q&A. So do put any questions in the Q&A box that you might have, please. So David's already outlined restoration is really high on the conservation policy agenda in Europe and beyond at the moment. And this has brought unprecedented attention on the potential of restoration to provide benefits for nature, climate, and people. And this raised level of interest will hopefully be matched with investment from governments and businesses. However, along with this interest and investment will come scrutiny to see if restoration really is delivering the expected benefits. And perhaps surprisingly, there's relatively little evidence actually detailing the outcomes of restoration projects. We recently worked with CCI partners on a review looking for evidence for the results of restoration in Europe. And we're really quite surprised to find there was really quite a scarcity of data describing the outcomes of restoration, whether that be in terms of the effects on numbers of plants and animals, quality and health of habitats, or the benefits that are provided to people. So we're at a point where there's a real substantial recent increase in interest in ecological restoration, but a lack of knowledge of what the outcomes are actually likely to be. And I believe the only way to overcome this is to carry out more and better monitoring and to share the findings. Such data can be used to advocate for more restoration by really revealing the benefits that can result, particularly if we can include costs to show the value for money of these so-called nature-based solutions. So data can be used by governments and other decision makers to formulate effective policies that are more likely to achieve what they set out to. These could be local decisions, for example, creating protected areas, regional policies, so for example, agri-environment schemes and subsidies, or global conventions setting targets for areas to be restored. But these all need to be informed by evidence. Results from monitoring can also be used to inspire others. If you see the outcome of a nearby restoration project and the difference it's making, you're much more likely to consider adopting it on the land that you manage. In addition, the only way to ensure these projects are really sustainable in the long term is to win the support of local communities. And a key way to do this is to demonstrate the benefits that are flowing from them. Monitoring data also provides important evidence about which restoration actions do and don't work, which can inform future ecosystem management and make it more effective. And finally, as a donor, it's really important to us that we can demonstrate to Arcadia, who provide our money, and to others that the money we're spending is having a real effect. And monitoring data can allow us to do this. However, although we believe that monitoring restoration is really critical, we also understand it's often not straightforward, and there are numerous reasons why it might be quite difficult to get really good monitoring data. And quite a lot of these factors that David referred to in the general sort of complexity and difficulty of projects. Firstly, timescales. Projects that we fund have visions that are decades or even centuries. They won't reach their final outcome or even anywhere near it within the 5-year period that we fund them. So projects need to think about how they can collect data that will show change in the longer term, but also to be able to detect change within the timescale of the funding cycle and to show that their natural habitats and species in the landscape are on the trajectory to recovery. Secondly, all our projects are working over really huge spatial scales. The size of our current landscapes range from about 10,000 to about 1 million hectares. Therefore, the teams collecting the data really need to think carefully about how they're going to do this, and often monitor just a subset or sample of the site, because it would just be too difficult and time-consuming to collect data across the whole area. Finally, large restoration projects are complicated. They're complicated in terms of the landscapes, which are heterogeneous and fragmented. There'll be a number of habitats, there'll be different landowners, and there'll be different management strategies. Actions being taken up by the projects are also complex and interrelated. So for all these reasons, projects have to really think carefully about which measures or indicators they collect data for. It's not possible to measure changes across all, for example, animal and plant species and all habitats. Instead, we work with the projects to try and identify indicators which are going to be most useful and informative to demonstrate the changes that they hope to see. So we ask all ELP projects to collect data to measure change across a number of different aspects of their landscape because of the sort of multifaceted nature of landscape restoration that David referred to. So the first aspect of their project we ask them to monitor is ecological. So these indicators can include things like change in the number of plants or animals, the particular species of interest. Projects also need to collect data on change in at least one ecosystem service. So ecosystem services describe the benefits provided to people by well-functioning ecosystems. So an example of an ecosystem service indicator could be a reduction in flood risk due to planting new trees in river catchment areas. The final type of indicator that we ask the projects to collect data on is the social and economic aspects of the project. So one really frequently used economic indicator is the number of jobs created in businesses associated with nature. So for example, jobs in wildlife guiding businesses. So across all these types of indicators, the projects collect baseline data at the start of their funding from the ELP, and Victor talked a bit about this in the video from Felicia. The projects will then collect data using the same methodology towards the end of the funding period to demonstrate the changes that have taken place. I'm now going to go on and talk a little bit more about one of our projects and some of the indicators they're using to monitor change in their landscape. So this is a project working in the Mediterranean coast of Turkey, which is being led by the CCI organisation Fauna and Flora International and their Turkish partner, AKD. So this is an area with really important marine habitat, including seagrass beds, and it provides a home for some of the Mediterranean's most charismatic and endangered species, including monk seal, sandbar shark, and loggerhead turtles. There are also important commercial fish species there, such as dusky grouper and bluefin tuna. Although there's been a long history of fishing in the area, more recently there's been significant illegal and unregulated overfishing, which has led to damage to the ecosystem. And there's also been an unsustainable increase in tourism recently, which has also caused challenges. The ELP-funded project here hopes that restoring healthy native marine communities will result in a resilient and restored ecosystem that's also able to support sustainable fishing by the local communities. The project's main approach to doing this is to create no fishing zones in which marine ecosystems can recover. Alongside this, they're also removing discarded fishing gear from the seafloor and working with local fishers to increase awareness of the issues of overfishing. So how is this project monitoring the change that's taking place as a result of their actions? Sandbar shark are one of the focal species for this project. They're a flagship predator with a globally vulnerable status, which have been significantly affected by the degradation of the marine community, which has really reduced the amount of prey that's available to them. The sharks have also been affected by increasing levels of tourism, which has disturbed their habitat. So by creating the no fishing zones, the project's hoping to restore marine communities and hence the abundance of prey species for these predators, leading to an increase in shark numbers. A decrease in disturbance by fishing and tourism will also encourage more sharks to come into and remain within the protected areas. So one measure of success for this project will be the number of sharks using the project area. The team are assessing this by setting GoPro cameras along known shark swimming routes from April to September annually, which is the main season for sharks in the area. They then collect in the cameras periodically, download the data, and count the number of observations of sandbar shark recorded. So we now have the baseline data from the start of the project, which found that on average there were approximately 2 sharks sighted each day before the new no fishing zones were created. And collecting those data over future years will provide information about any changes in shark numbers that are using the project seascape. So it will be interesting and hopeful to see how that changes. Another really important question for this project is how restoration is affecting the local fishing communities. These communities have been seriously affected by the degradation of the marine ecosystem. Anecdotal data suggests that over the past 15 years, there's been a really sharp decrease in catch size, affecting livelihoods of local fishers and impacting the wider economy. However, there's been a recent small-scale pilot restoration project in this area, where they created a small no fishing zone And this has given really reasons to be hopeful about the new project. Within 5 years, that pilot area saw a significant recovery of habitat and of fish stock. And this led to a corresponding increase in local fishing incomes. So the same organisations that set up that pilot study are now using ELP funding to roll this approach out to a much larger area. It's really, really important that the impacts of restrictions on these fisheries, on the incomes and fish catch on the local community are documented to show that even though they're restricting fishing in some areas, there are actual benefits to people and to wildlife that are being seen. And if we collect data, we can really clearly evidence that. So the indicator they're using to monitor the changing catches is catch data. And the aim is to track the spillover effects of creating no fishing zones and look at the impact on fish caught further along the coast in terms of the number, weight, and species of fish. And actually the data needed to assess this indicator are already being gathered by the fishing cooperatives. So a fisher will come into a cooperative to sell their catch, and the workers will record the weight of fish caught for each species as it's purchased. So the project just needs to collate these data and log them and look at change through time. So again, we've got the baseline data from 2019 for this project, which shows that for every length of net at the start of the project, they caught on average 2.5 kilos of fish. We'll now continue to look at how these catches change through time as fishing in some areas is restricted, protecting nursery grounds and hopefully increasing the productivity. So I hope I've given a very quick overview of why we think science and monitoring is important and how it's being applied on the ground in one of our projects, or rather in the sea. I thought I would finish with a few reflections on the challenges and opportunities of monitoring large-scale projects. Firstly, because monitoring can be difficult and does require time and effort to carry out well, it needs both funders and projects to prioritise it in their budgets and proposals. And I really believe it needs to be an integral part of planning and implementation of any large-scale restoration project. Because these systems are so complicated, practitioner organisations may need support with this from their peers and other experts to allow them to really develop effective monitoring plans. And organisations such as the University of Cambridge and CCI can have key roles here. Another quite interesting point to mention is that new technologies are vastly increasing the amount of data that can be gathered by projects all the time. So for example, ELP projects are using satellite data to look at change in vegetation across really large areas. They're using geotags and tracking to monitor the movements of animals and birds. And they're also starting to use things like environmental DNA and acoustic monitoring to detect the presence of species that we might not be able to otherwise monitor easily. And finally, I just wanted to emphasise that it's really critical that individual projects share the results of their monitoring. Only in this way can we build up the evidence base and share lessons learned so that restoration becomes more effective and really can deliver its anticipated benefits for nature and people. So I will finish there. I'd like to thank all our colleagues at CCI, the ELP, and across the projects that we fund. And thank you all for coming along and listening. And David and I will be very pleased to take any questions. So please do put them in the Q&A box.
Thank you, everyone. We do have a good set of questions here. We do our best to respond to some of them. So maybe I could just kind of start off. We've got a question here asking us, starting at the top here, whether herbivores are good for the environment, and noting that there seems to be a lot of dissent about this over cattle. So I guess my answer to this would be pretty much like, I mean, there's a big debate around trees, which is really about the right trees in the right place. And I guess it's the same with herbivores. It's about the right herbivores in the right place. So a lot of the problems with herbivores that people talk about are about the density of herbivores. So really high numbers of herbivores. You'll be familiar with much of the discussion around deer in the Scottish uplands, for example, where very, very high levels of deer, red deer in particular, maintained, which is suppressing the regeneration of forests. So that's a big issue. It's also about the diversity of species. So, I mean, herbivores, large herbivores, would have been a part of any natural system, pretty much. So they are most definitely important, and they're important for maintaining the level of disturbance and heterogeneity in the landscape, which is important for nature and biological diversity. So we really do need herbivores to open up the vegetation, to create patches in vegetation. But obviously, if herbivore numbers are too high, they can suppress tree and shrub growth, and therefore their impact is negative. So what I would say is it's about the density, it's about a mix of herbivores, and it's about having the right herbivores in the right place. So it's not a straightforward answer as are they good or are they bad. It's a matter of really finding the right balance across this range of issues.
Thanks, David. Shall I take one now? There's a question from Garth asking about whether we should try to engineer rewilding of endangered landscapes or just enable it to happen. And I think it's another question which kind of annoyingly gets the answer, it depends. I would say the projects we fund are taking a real range of approaches, from quite passive rewilding and kind of letting natural processes take over to quite interventionist. I guess one thing to say is it probably depends on timescale. Often, particularly in sort of northern climates and things, change can be really quite slow, and often things need kickstarting. There may not be populations of animals or plants ready to move in if it's kind of isolated from other areas of wilderness and natural habitats. So quite a lot of our projects are doing either replanting or releasing animals, as David described. And definitely we want all our projects to become areas where there's less management. That's definitely an ambition of ours. But often they will need some help to get onto that place, to the place where natural processes can take over and they can become self-sustaining. So I think, our aim is to become less intensive management for sure, but often on the way there, it needs a bit of help.
Okay, I've got a question here about human-wildlife conflict, asking how can such conflicts be resolved after the landscape is restored? I guess the simple answer that I would come to that is to say that they should ideally be resolved before the landscape is restored. So the ideal situation that certainly we encourage, and all our projects I think aspire to, is actually to work with communities through the restoration process to find out ways in which the landscape can be restored, wildlife be returned to the landscape without causing conflict. But and many solutions do exist. I mean, obviously, conflict with carnivores is the one that immediately comes to mind. And several of our projects are addressing this, and they're addressing it in innovative ways and also very kind of practical ways, I guess, that you'd expect them to. So, supporting livestock owners with electric fencing, for example, but also with traditional methods as well. So both in our project with our grantee in Romania, but also our grantee in Portugal, what they found was that traditional approaches, long-term cultural approaches to living with wolves, for example, for sheep owners, had declined. So the traditional approach of shepherds working with traditional breeds of sheepdog was in significant decline. Those breeds of sheepdog weren't available. A lot of the kind of understanding about how to work with those dogs had gone from the community. And in both of those projects, they have actually set up dog breeding and training kennels, and then are providing these dogs to local communities. So it's quite a simple strategy, but it is having a lot of success because actually these traditional cultural approaches to addressing those kind of conflicts historically are very successful.
Great. So there's a question here about the greatest gaps in knowledge that need to be filled to make progress in restoring threatened landscapes. And funny you should ask that. Actually, about 3 years ago, just when I started this job, we carried out an exercise to identify exactly that. So it was called an exercise to identify the 100 priority questions in landscape restoration. And we brought together a whole bunch of experts in landscape restoration, from policymakers to practitioners to academics to private landowners, people working across different regions of Europe and different ecosystems. And we kind of had a really intensive couple of days workshop to try and identify what are the top questions. And yeah, slightly frustratingly, there were a lot of questions, across a lot of areas. But I think the longer I work in this area, actually, the more I think that a lot of the major barriers are to do with people and understanding psychology and economics and history and culture. And although there are definitely ecological questions outstanding, they tend not to be the most significant problems. Often we generally know where we want the ecosystem to get to. We want more native woodland, we want more heterogeneity, we want more complete guilds of species and food webs. It's often, and because we're working in Europe, these are really, there's almost always people living and working in these landscapes, and that will continue to be the case. And it's how to work with those people to bring back the natural processes as well, I think, that is often the most challenging part for us at the moment.
Thanks. I've got a question here about which types of industry would be in favour of restoration, noting that most are thought of as destructive. I'm going to kind of, I guess, take some liberties with that question and open it up a little bit, just to, I guess, make the point that there is really increasing recognition now of the importance of what's called natural capital, of the services that nature provides across a whole range of sectors. So, foresters in forestry are beginning to realize that exotic species in single species stands are really not the best way of producing timber and producing the services they provide. People are realizing the value of natural peatlands on hills for regulating water flow. They're realizing the value of natural floodplains for preventing flooding downstream, as acting as a kind of a natural reservoir that prevents flooding downstream. So, and there are so many industries at different levels really that benefit from this. Their infrastructure benefits from these services that that nature provides. Health sector, I mean, if you can consider health an industry, I mean, that in itself as well has recognized the importance of natural healthy environments and green space. And the food sector as well. I mean, in so many parts of the world now, they're realizing, including in the EU, the importance of a kind of more diverse, holistic approach to agriculture. And there is clear signs that the kind of tide is turning on this. The importance of regenerative agriculture is beginning to increase. So I think that certainly kind of manufacturing industry will probably be quite hard, to find ways that they would ever really have a kind of direct relationship with restored habitats. But in terms of the kind of economy as a whole, and so many parts of our economy and society, the importance of restoration is becoming ever more apparent, which is why it is such a priority within the agendas internationally and within the EU. So the EU now is setting major targets for restoring habitats for all of those reasons that I described.
There's a question about monitoring here, which I guess I should take. Do your monitoring efforts incorporate evaluation and making relevant changes to practice where needed? Absolutely. So I think what that question is about is often called adaptive management in conservation. And it's a really, really key use of monitoring data is to look at, are you on course? Is the number of birds increasing? Is the water quality improving? If not, do we need to change what we're doing a bit, and then continue to monitor and see if that's made things better or worse? So we absolutely encourage our projects to collect data to inform their future decision making, and to see if what they're doing is having the expected results, because, as I said, these are such complicated landscapes, you can't ever predict what the outcome of an action will be. So it's really important. There may be some other factor going on, I don't know, weather, an international pandemic that might affect what's happening more than what you're doing. And it's so important to collect data and to track things, and then to see if it's a result of your actions or not. And we do try to encourage our projects to have control areas where possible as well, to try and account for some of these external factors. And I guess one thing to say is the slow rate of change in many of these systems mean it probably has to be quite a slow cycle for adaptive management. So it might take, I don't know, 5 years, even 10 years to really know what the effects of your actions are being. And that's why we really put a lot of emphasis on sharing data and results as well. Because if you've gone through that 10-year process and someone a bit further down the road is about to start a similar project, it would be much better for them if they could learn from what you've done, rather than going through that whole lesson learning for themselves as well. But yeah, no, feeding information both into projects' own management plans and the wider restoration community are both absolutely vital.
So I've got a long question here from Jürgen Ivanis, and I'm going to unashamedly use my answer to give a quick plug to the programme. He asks about the normal process for applying for funding to the Endangered Landscapes Programme, and also about the challenges of a startup phase for a really complex project like a landscape scale project that the programme funds. So very, very quickly on this, I mean, our main grants, actually, we've just closed for applications for new grants, and it's a expression of interest stage. First of all, we hope to make final decisions on in principle agreement sometime early next year. And those projects are we give relatively large grants for a trust and foundation. So we have grants of up to $5 million for each individual grant. And Jürgen's absolutely right that those projects do need preparation. There's a lot of pre-contractual work that needs to be done. But what I would say is that we tend to fund projects that are ready to scale up. So we wouldn't provide $5 million for a completely new initiative. What we've done is funded projects where groundwork has been done and they're ready to scale up. But what I would also say is we have another separate set of grants, which are called project planning grants, because we do recognize that there is a real need to actually do this work with stakeholders, with landowners, to look at legislation, look at land use, look at technical areas, establish baselines. So we provide smaller grants of up to $100,000 to really do that detailed planning work. So we have 10 planning projects at the moment that are actually doing that kind of work. So what I would encourage anyone that's listening to visit the website and find out more detail about any of those projects, please do so. There's more information there. Nancy, I don't know if you've got time for another quick question.
Only if I can manage to unmute myself. Yes, aware of time, but yes, actually, relevantly, there's a question from Roger Scruton about the timescale of projects relating to this, which seems quite long, and how it relates to the timescale of the climate and environmental crises, which I think is a good point. So I guess my answer to that will be, we've got to start as soon as we can, by providing this quite significant funding at large scales. We hope we're making as much difference as we can. As I mentioned, we recently funded a small project to look at, for example, the carbon benefits of each of our restoration landscapes and the amount of carbon that's being sequestered by them. And it is often quite a sort of linear process. So, and definitely in terms of avoided emissions. So, for example, if you're protecting a peatland, that carbon is locked away now, whereas if it had been drained and the carbon had been released, that would have been an immediate impact. So we're saving that. So there definitely are some quick wins. And as David said, changes in wetland systems often tend to be quicker than in terrestrial systems. But yeah, we hope by allowing natural regeneration of forests, planting trees, generally allowing vegetation to recover, that carbon is accumulating. And again, I guess it comes back to that question I answered previously about sort of rewilding versus more managed restoration. We're kickstarting where we need to in terms of the biodiversity recovery as well. So where species have got really rare they are being reintroduced, they're being captive bred or moved from areas where they're more plentiful. So yeah, I think we're thinking short term and long term within the programme. So I guess it's 10:02 now. We've had so many brilliant questions. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we can't answer them all. But I guess we better wrap up there. So thank you all very much for coming. And do go to the website and find out more.